So let's wrap up the forearm. Okay, we are now moving to the posterior side of the forearm. So these are going to be extensors, right? So on the anterior, they were flexors. Now we have extensors on the posterior side of the forearm. Okay. So we do have the same types of groups. We have superficial muscles, intermediate muscles, as well as deep muscles. There are a few more to know on the posterior side, but don't get overwhelmed. They're kind of fun on the posterior side. The names of the muscle tells us exactly where they're going to be and what they're going to be doing. Okay. Now, a really easy thing as well for the posterior muscles of the forearm, every single one of them, for superficial, intermediate, and deep, all of them are going to be innervated by the radial nerve of the brachial plexus because we are on the posterior side. Remember, median and the ulnar nerve were on the anterior side. So now we're on the posterior. It doesn't matter if it's superficial, intermediate, or deep. It's the radial nerve of the brachial plexus. Awesome. So we don't even have to talk about those. Okay? So we're going to start with the superficial extensors on the posterior forearm. There's a weird one. Okay? So we have brachioradialis, and we've actually seen brachioradialis in another image. The brachioradialis is weird because it is posterior, but it can also be seen from the anterior side. It's also weird because it's the only one on the posterior side that actually flexes, right? I just said that all of these posteriors are going to be extensors. This is a weird one. So the brachioradialis is actually going to be flexing the forearm at the elbow because it does cross the elbow joint. But it's also going to be responsible for supinating and pronating the radius. Okay, so that should tell you something. If it's supinating and pronating the radius, that means it's going to be moving the radius, which means its insertion is going to be on the radius, specifically the styloid process of the radius. Okay, so it is going to originate more so on this posterior side, right? So which is why it gets classified here. So you can see it in green here, and then you can also see it in red in this image. But it's going to be just kind of on this lateral supracondylar ridge of the humerus, which really is just referring to this lateral ridge, this sheet, the little crest of bone that's above the condyle. Okay, specifically the lateral condyle. Okay, so I am just going to go back for a quick second just so you can see the brachioradialis in the anterior position right here. So when we were looking at more so these, right? So remember we had our superficial anterior muscles and we had that really distinguishable pronator teres. Well, right on the other side of it is the brachioradialis. Okay, so it's next to the pronator teres on the anterior side, right? But it's also next to the extensor carpi radialis longus on the posterior side. All right, so that's our oddball. All right, so now we can just continue on with these extensors. So right next to the brachioradialis again is the extensor carpi radialis longus, which again, it's right there in the name. Okay, so extensor, we know that its action is going to be extending. Carpi, so we know it's going to be crossing the wrist, so it's going to be extending the hand at the wrist. Radialis, radial is always lateral, so it's going to be on the lateral side of the body. Okay, which if it's on the lateral side of the body means it's also going to be abducting, right? So moving away from the medial portion of the body. So right there in the name, we already know the action. Extensor carpi radialis longus, extending and abducting the hand at the wrist. Okay, now also because it's radialis, it's going to be on the lateral side. It's going to come down and be inserting itself onto the metacarpal 2. Okay, so we don't do metacarpal 1, right? We're not doing the pollixiac, we're not doing the thumb. It'll have its own muscles, just like we saw on the anterior side. It's the same with the posterior side. And it's always the deep muscles that control the thumb, right? It was the deep muscles that were, the flexor pollicis longus that was on the thumb. And it'll be other, deep extensors that control the thumb. So for this radialis longus muscle, even though it is lateral, we have to go to the next best thing, which would be metacarpal 2. All right. Then we can move on to extensor carpi radialis brevis. So on this image, it's showing them both in blue, but you can see brevis will be obviously the shorter one. Okay, so it's also going to be lateral because it's radialis, but it's not going to insert all the way onto, it's not going to be as lateral. Okay, and you can kind of see that from the image. So it's actually going to be inserting at metacarpal 3. So extensor carpi radialis longus, metacarpal 2. Extensor carpi radialis brevis, metacarpal 3. Okay, awesome. So for both of these muscles, they will be originating up onto the LEH, which is the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. Okay, but the extensor carpi radialis longus is also going to originate on the supracondylar crest. Okay, so right around where that brachioradialis is originating. All right, so those are those 3, and the last one for superficial muscles is going to be the extensor carpi ulnaris. All right, the other muscles on this list are considered intermediate, or not list, but image are intermediate. So extensor carpi ulnaris, that should again tell us what's going on. Ulnaris, so it's going to be on the medial side of the body, on the medial side, or like the ulnar side, which means it's going to insert at the metacarpal on the medial side, which is metacarpal 5. Okay, and because it's on the medial side of the body and it's carpi, it's extending over the wrist, we know it's going to extend the wrist extend the hand at the wrist, but it's also going to adduct because it's on the medial side of the body. Okay, extensor carpi radialis longus was abducting because it was on the lateral side. Ulnaris, medial side, so it adducts. Anytime it says extensor carpi, you know that the action's going to be extending the hand at the wrist. Extensor carpi radialis brevis only extends the hand at the wrist because longus and extensor carpi ulnaris are more lateral or more medial. They have additional actions. Okay, so then we can move to those intermediates, which I think are, again, these are just kind of fun muscles. The names are telling us everything we need to know. Okay, so here's again on the anterior side brachioradialis and on the posterior side, so you can see that it's next to again that pronator teres on the anterior side. They kind of make like a V with each other, right? And then the extensor carpi radialis longus is next to it on the posterior side. Okay, so let's get into the intermediates. We've got 2 of them. We've got the extensor digitorum and the extensor digiti minimi, which is just super fun to say. Okay, so the extensor digitorum is in this pink, and the extensor digiti minimi is in the purple here, and then they're color-coded on this one. All right, now they have the same origin point, which was the same origin point for the other superficial muscles, right? The lateral epicondyle of the humerus. Easy, perfect. Okay. So we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about innervation. Let's just pay attention to the names of these muscles because it's going to tell us everything we need to know. Okay. Extensor digitorum, extending the digits. Okay. All right. So extensor digitorum is going to extend the digits. We already know that it's not going to be associated with the thumb, right? So it's just going to go to the distal phalanges of the digits 2 through 5. Okay, extensor digitorum, we're extending the digits. We're not worrying about the thumb yet. We know that those are going to be the deep ones. So for this muscle, we know it's going to be at the distal region of 2 through 5. Okay? So that means because it's also crossing over the wrist, we're also going to have some extending the hand at the wrist. Okay. So that's our action. We've got the insertion because it tells us this right in the name. So let's move on to extensor digiti minimi. Now, digiti minimi, it's really fun to say, but digit and mini. So what is the smallest little tiny digit on our hand? It's our pinky. Okay, so right there in the name, we know that this is going to the pinky, and it's going to insert at the distal phalanx of digit 5, the pinky. Okay, and because it's inserting there, that means it's going to be extending digit 5, finger 5, right? Because it's extensor digiti minimi. Use the names of the muscles, okay? They named them, accordingly, right? To make it make sense for you guys. So digiti minimi, smallest finger. So digit 5, extending it, and it's going to be inserting there as well. Awesome. So now let's go into the deep. So like I already said, it's going to be associated, some of these are going to be associated with the thumb. Now we do have a weird one, okay? Let's get that one out of the way first. So this is the supinator muscle. So it's in yellow on this image and it's in green on this image. So the supinator muscle, it's not necessarily weird it's grouped together because it's on the posterior side of the forearm and it's also going to be, innervated by the radial nerve. So it gets grouped together, right? The supinator muscle is going to be originating at the LEH, the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. So pretty similar to the other muscles that we've looked at so far, with the exception of the brachioradialis, of course. But the weird thing about the supinator is that, well, it's not an extensor, okay? It's a supinator. It's named accordingly. So it's going to be supinating, which, what does that tell us? If it's supinating, then that means it has to have something to do with the radius. So we can then say that its insertion is going to be the radius, specifically proximal radius. So the thing to remember, though, is that there's another muscle that's going to be only supinating, right? Some of these were pronating, some were doing both, right? To supinate, you're looking at the bicep brachii and the supinator. Now, the bicep brachii is the primary supinator, but it's specifically going to be supinating when the forearm is flexed at the elbow. So if you flex your elbow, make a right angle, and put your hand over your bicep brachii and supinate and pronate your hand, and you'll feel your bicep brachii move and contract. Okay. The supinator is down on the posterior side of the forearm, and it's going to be lateral. So kind of, position your hand accordingly. The supinator muscle only supinates when the forearm is extended. So extend your forearm. So be in anatomical position. Put your hand over the supinator and supinate and pronate, and you'll be able to feel that muscle contract. Okay. So the bicep brachii, again, is the primary supinator, but you have to understand that both of these muscles are only going to be working when either the forearm is flexed or extended. Okay, cool. So now let's go on to our kind of more normal muscles of the deep extensors, because again, they are actually true extenders. Okay. So we already know the innervation. Again, it's the radial nerve of the brachial plexus. Let's again use the names of the muscles to tell us what we need to know. All right. We're going to start with the abductor pollicis longus. I mean, come on, it's right there in the name. So we're looking at this blue muscle here. Again, all of these are sort of on the lateral side of the posterior forearm. Okay, abductor pollicis longus is in red here on the posterior side of the forearm. Okay, so, I mean, come on. Abductor, that's the action, okay? It's going to be abducting. Where is it going to be abducting? Pollicis. It's going to be abducting and extending the thumb, because again, it's an extender, so we got to throw in that extension. Okay. Now, because it's going to be at the thumb, it's pollicis longus, so it's going to be inserting at the base of the metacarpal. Awesome. We'll come back to origins for these. Okay. So let's go to the next one. Extensor pollicis brevis. It's right there in the name. Okay. So extensor pollicis brevis. All right. So this guy is going to be extending the thumb because it's an extensor, but it's also going to be abducting the hand. Not the thumb, it's going to be abducting the hand. Abductor pollicis abducts the thumb. Extensor pollicis longus is going to be abducting the hand, so moving it away from the medial line. Okay? Now, the extensor pollicis longus is going to be, again, extensor pollicis, extending the thumb, and it's also going to be abducting the hand. Okay, so let's talk about the insertion for these two, extensor pollicis brevis and extensor pollicis longus. Okay, they have the same action. Let's talk about insertions. Okay, so brevis means short, right? So it's going to be a shorter molecule, a shorter muscle. Okay, so we have this shorter muscle here in red, and then the little buddy here in this little orange, right? So it's going to be inserting at the proximal end of the thumb, right? So it is still pollicis, so it's still going to be associated with the thumb, but it's short. So I think, okay, so it's shorter, so it's not going to reach as long, so it's going to be touching the proximal, okay? Whereas extensor pollicis longus is going to be at the base of the distal phalanx of the thumb, right? So it's still the thumb because it's pollicis, but it's going to be distal because it's longer, so it can go further away from the trunk. So you can see it's going to go all the way to the distal. Okay, so both these extensor pollicis, brevis and longus, have the same action, extending the thumb and abducting the thumb, but brevis is short, so it's going to be proximal. Longus is long, so it's going to be distal for the insertions. Okay, and then the last one here in purple or blue, depending on the image you're looking at, is extensor indicus. So this is extending the index finger, indicus. All right, and so that's the action, and then the insertion would be the dorsal surface of the index finger. All right, and you can see that it would be coming down onto the index finger. All right, so use the names of the muscles to help you figure out these insertions and insertions and actions. Okay, let's talk origins. The abductor pollicis longus. Abductor pollicis longus, right? This was the one that was going to be abducting the thumb and extending the thumb. Okay, so this is going to be originating up on the posterior ramus, which, the posterior radius, okay, because again, this is kind of a more lateral muscle, but also the ulna and the interosus membrane between the two muscles. All right. Now, the extensor pollicis brevis, so the little short buddy, this guy is going to be only originating on the radius, not the ulna, but it's also going to be originating on the interosus membrane. Okay. The extensor pollicis longus is going to be actually more medial, and it will be originating on the ulna and again the interosus membrane. And the extensor indicus is going to have the same origin as extensor pollicis longus, the ulna and the interosus membrane. So these four muscles, abductor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, extensor pollicis longus, and extensor indicus, are all going to be inserting at the interosus membrane, right? It's just having to remember, okay, the abductor is going to be on the radius and the ulna. The extensor pollicis brevis is only going to be at the radius. And then the last two, longus and extensor indicus, are going to be at the membrane and the ulna. All right. So there is still kind of a pattern for the origins, but we have to rely on either remembering where these are actually located, having that visual, the color coding image, or just memorization. But the names of the muscles tell us the actions and the insertions. Okay. So here we have just kind of a little review picture to go through these posterior extensor muscles on the forearm, right? So they have like the little, just like abbreviations. Is there a name for when you just use the letters? I don't remember. But just to kind of, shorten it for you. Again, if it has a C in it, it's referring to carpi, so it's going to go over the wrist, right? So it gives you indication of, some of the actions, right? The digitorums, right? Those are going to be, controlling your digits. So it's just understanding, is it all the digits or is it going to just be the last little digit? If it has a P in it, then that means it's going to be controlling the thumb in some type of way. The EI, the extensor indicus, is going to be the, just the index finger. And then, of course, there's that weird supinator that doesn't actually extend, but is still posterior and is innervated by the radial nerve, so it gets grouped here. It's not even colored, so keeping that in mind, this up here is the supinator.